Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I just wanted to go over a quick bit of news from Doctor Who over the last couple of days. Obviously there hasn't been a ton going on, but there have been two things that I wanted to highlight, so join me on this journey as we go through some of the latest Doctor Who news. But before we get into it, if you could do me a teeny tiny little favour and click that subscribe button, it'd be very much appreciated. Any support is always very much welcome. But with that said, let's get into the video. So the first thing I wanted to highlight is actually something I've not seen many people talk about because it was only released at time of recording yesterday. BBC Studios on the future and priorities for the Doctor Who brand. So this comes part of coverage of the Doctor Who Children in Need charity auction, which for those of you who have not seen is them listing a bunch of old props from Doctor Who for sale for charity for children in need, which by the way, I saw a lot of kind of discourse surrounding when it comes to, preservation. Personally, while I do think it is a bit of a bummer that we're not going to see some of this stuff in public, in an experience type capacity again, at the same time, I can't be particularly mad because it's for charity. It's for children in need at the end of the day, so I'm not going to begrudge them, selling off some props for children in need. Yes, it would be nice to have them preserved, but I think some things are bigger than Doctor Who and Doctor Who fandom, and I feel like charity is one of those things. I have seen some people suggest the idea of, why not make it like a raffle-based system, so that way, like, normal fans could have a chance to get some of this stuff, because obviously, with the prices on most of these things, it's pretty much going to be impossible for any normal fan to get them. But my kind of feeling on that is, with a raffle system where everyone pays in the same, you're inevitably going to make less money that way. So it almost makes more sense to do it in the way that they are. I get that, it might be a bummer to not get some of this stuff. Chances are I probably won't get any of this stuff, unless there's something really cheap by the end that I sort of go, maybe I can squeeze together the coins for that, but probably not. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that. But what I actually wanted to talk about was this, which is BBC talking a little bit about the kind of future of Doctor Who and where they see it going. As Doctor Who's modern era approaches its 20th anniversary, all eyes are on the future of the show and what that will look like. There's no doubt it's an interesting time for the iconic sci-fi series as we approach Ncuti Gatwa's highly anticipated second season, following a run that had eyes on it all over the world thanks to the lucrative deal with Disney. But how do the powers that be feel the first season of the show's soft reboot when? What impact has the Disney budget actually had on the show, and how would they respond to debates about the show's success? As the doors to the Doctor Who prop auction, which is raising money for children in need, open, RadioTimes.com caught up with John Hammer, production executive, and Vanessa Hamilton, brand director, to get their thoughts. Hammer, who represents BBC Studios across all Whoniverse productions, looks back on the first season of Doctor Who's new era as a huge success, saying it's been brilliant. It just shows that the passion for Doctor Who as a brand, as a character in the world, it just keeps going and it can keep regenerating each time. A cheesy line, but it can. Each new era in Doctor Who gives us something new and a different take on it, and a different take on the character, and reflects the audience itself. One big difference is the budget. It's no secret that Doctor Who has had a very welcome injection of cash, resulting in visuals and scenes that wouldn't have been possible back in the day. Doctor Who has always not struggled, but it's had a hard time to get the financial backing to realise writers' visions. Hammer points out. You do the best you can. The new budget has elevated that, in a sense, in that you can create this world a bit more convincingly than in 1963. So I think it's really added to the ambition of it and made it a global show, which has always been, but it's given us a chance to reach that bigger audience. So with that amplified budget, what are the brand priorities for Doctor Who right now? Brand director Hamilton says, for us, it's celebrating the breadth of Doctor Who, and the fact that every day people are learning about it and falling in love with it, and everyone has their own Doctor and their own favourite story, she says. I've been watching classic Doctor Who in order. What other show has that long a shelf life that people will watch content from the 60s and then hop to 2013 and all around? I think for us, it's about celebrating all of the different ways that people love Doctor Who. From a brand point of view, that's what we want to lean into. That Doctor Who means so many different things to so many different people, but it's all a bit different. I mean, this very much comes across with the whole Whoniverse initiative, the kind of moving to the forefront of classic stories, be it via new colorizations or tales of the TARDIS, or just the fact that most of the archive is completely accessible on iPlayer. There does seem to be a more concerted effort to show Doctor Who as many different things and kind of celebrate that history, whereas kind of early on in like the RTD1 era, there was kind of this sense of this is a new thing, we've got to try and really market it as this new sort of show, this new exciting project, whereas now they're kind of embracing the history of it more, which is interesting. There are some who will always claim that Doctor Who's run its course. As for what she'd say to that portion of the viewership, Hamilton added. Sorry, whenever I hear the word Hamilton, my mind immediately goes to the play, but I digress. Doctor Who will always be around in people's hearts and minds, and it'll never go away in that respect. It's been around for 60 years, it'll continue to be around for as long as people love adventures in space and time. This is kind of similar to something that, like, Russell said, in that, like, Doctor Who is, like, eternal in, like, the hearts and minds and stuff. I think a lot of that is probably just, like, marketing speak, and obviously they're not going to say exactly what future plans are. But I do find it interesting that, at least from what the BBC is saying, they seem pretty happy with where Doctor Who's at. Obviously, you could say again, you know, oh, but of course they would say that publicly, and I guess to a certain extent you are right, but I also just doubt that Doctor Who is going anywhere on the BBC's end. Again, as I've said before, I think the Disney end is a lot more questionable. I think, you know, they could pull out. But I think the BBC will keep going with it no matter what, even if that means a lesser budget for seasons after season 2, which, to be honest, I was thinking about this the other day, might not be the worst thing in the world when you actually look at season 1. Yes, it's very polished, yes, it's very clean, but I kind of think that some of Doctor Who's charm is in its kind of rugged, kind of put togetherness. Even in the early revival, it kind of had that sort of scrappy underdog feel to it, which I almost feel like is a core part of the show's identity in a way. I think it almost looks weird to an extent when it looks borderline, you know, close to the MCU or Star Wars or what have you. So honestly, I wouldn't even be opposed to there being less budget. As long as the show continues, I'm pretty fine with that. But that's pretty much all there is for this article. They mainly just go on to list details surrounding the auction, which we also already talked about. But the other bit of news I wanted to talk about was this. So for those of you who are long-time viewers of the channel, you'll know that we covered when Fear Her, the Doctor Who episode starring the 10th Doctor David Tennant and Billie Piper Rose Tyler, was removed due to it featuring Hugh Edwards, who is a now disgraced former presenter for things like BBC News and just other TV shows in general. It featured his voice lines in the scenes where the Doctor was carrying the flame of the Olympic torch into the stadium. But it has now been re-uploaded and edited to remove Hugh Edwards. A Doctor Who episode featuring Hugh Edwards has been re-uploaded. The episode, which originally aired in 2006, was yanked from iPlayer following the scandal surrounding Edwards, and then they just go on to talk a little bit about the plot. This has now been wiped from the episode. Instead, his live commentary is played out by Becky Wright, who has previously provided the voice for Doctor Who's audio and podcast service. Becky's edition is almost an exact copy of Edwards, but the script had some minor tweaks. He's also been axed from the credits of the final episode. The BBC were believed to be reviewing archival footage involving Hugh, including his coverage of late Queen Elizabeth's death. Yeah, that's something I've always wondered with this. Like, how are they going to deal with the fact that he was the guy that announced Queen Elizabeth II's death on the BBC? Like, of course they're going to want to use that footage, but they can't now as a result of all of this. A BBC spokesperson told The Mirror, "As you would expect, we are actively considering this availability of our archive. While we don't routinely delete content from the BBC archive, as it is a matter of historical record, we do consider the continued use and reuse of material on a case-by-case basis." And then it just goes into a little bit of what he did, which is absolutely grim. Basically making indecent images of children, which I don't want to get into because it's just disgusting, quite frankly. But if you do want to know what the differences are, Mr. TARDIS actually put out a little clip comparing the two, which I'll play a segment from. I just want to give him a shout out for putting these together.
Just look at this, utterly incredible scenes at the Olympic Stadium. 80,000 athletes and spectators, they disappeared, they've come back.
Just look at this, utterly incredible scenes at the Olympic Stadium. 80,000 athletes and spectators. They disappeared, they've come back.
And it sounds a bit off, but I can't quite put my finger on it. It might just be because I'm so used to the delivery of the original that the new one sounds odd, but I don't know. I do think this somewhat prompts like a wider conversation though surrounding like the edits of television to a certain degree. Like obviously, I completely understand why the BBC took the decision they did to remove Hugh Edwards from this episode, especially when you consider the optics, you know, that it's about a kid who draws other kids and who is escaping an abusive father or, you know, husband in the case of the mum. I completely understand why optically, when you really think about it, those two things don't really mesh. Equally, at the time in which this was broadcast, none of this had happened, at least to my knowledge. So I do think there is an interesting debate to be had of like, is it right to edit stuff if the person who was in it comes out later on to be a bad person or problematic? Personally, I would lean on the side of caution when it comes to that kind of thing, because I think we kind of get into a slippery slope of like, where is the line there? But I think in this particular case, as I said, it does kind of make a lot of sense when you really think about it. Plus, it's Fear Her anyway, which, to be honest, no one really likes. So I don't think anyone's, like, you know, absolutely gutted about this or anything, I wouldn't have thought. But I do think there's an interesting debate to be had there. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. I think both arguments, the idea of, like, keeping it the same and the idea of changing it, you know, maybe you could have, like, a warning or, like, something like that. But yeah, it's a very interesting debate for sure. But I am glad at least that Fear Her's back on there, mainly because, you know, even though it's not one I go back to particularly often these days, I do have some level of nostalgia for it. I remember one of my first Doctor Who DVDs was the Fear Her Army Goes Doomsday 2-pack, and when I was young, you know, I only really had access to the Doctor Who I had on DVD, so I watched this and that 2-parter, among a few others that I also had on DVD, on repeat. So I do have a lot of nostalgia for this, even though I don't think it's very good. It's one of those where you watch it again as an adult and you go, yeah, this wasn't all that great. But let me know what you guys think about any of this in the comments below. If you did enjoy, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.